Hello, everyone, and welcome, Horizon attendees. I'm LaShawn Banks, and we have an exciting panel for you today. I would like to introduce our two panelists that will be speaking today and then give you a little bit of background about our conversation. So first, we have Ms. Karen Elsey. She's a committee member, and she's the Associate Executive Director at WorkCred. Next, we have Ms. Rachel Lipson, who's also a committee member, and she's the founding project director of the Project on Workforce at Harvard University's Malcolm Weiner Center for Social Policy. So today we're going to be talking about this workshop series that was launched last summer in 2020 by the National Academy of Sciences to address regional STEM workforce needs in the wake of COVID-19. So the National Academy sought to understand how the pandemic is impacting our skilled STEM labor needs, and if there are promising opportunities to upskill, to retrain, and certify a significant portion of displaced workers to meet new and shifting labor demands. So this was an 11 committee members that were selected to develop the workshop series, and they were led by former New Mexico Senator Jeff Bingaman, and one of the committee members is Maria Flynn, who's the president and CEO of JFF. So each of these, together they identified 5 regions across the country, which was Birmingham, Alabama, Boston, Massachusetts, Richmond, Virginia, Riverside, California, and Wichita, Kansas. And each of these cities represent different geographical regions and demographics and education opportunities in job sectors. Now, this full report is going to be available on the National Academy's press website, which is nap.edu, and some of the strategies that are highlighted in the report are going to be online. So with that, I want to jump right into this exciting discussion with Rachel and Karen. And I want to first ask both of you, across the 5 cities, what are the most significant areas of workforce impacted by the pandemic? And we can start with you, Karen.
Great. Thanks, LaShawn. So I think, with all the news reports that have been out, we've really seen that the impact from COVID disproportionately impacted women and people of color and industry sectors in which individuals weren't able to easily work from home. So things like restaurants, hospitality, tourism, and workers that were in low-wage jobs. And when we see that, then we really start to have to think about what are those strategies that we can better improve so that those individuals have better outcomes and can reconnect to the labor market.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that. First of all, thanks, LaShawn, for having us here today, and thanks to JFF. Excited to be part of the broader Horizons conversation. I think one of the things that came through in all of the regions that was featured was, first, to Karen's point, the accessibility of jobs in each of these regions had changed a lot over the course of the pandemic. So this was a major macro shock that different regions faced, and in terms of the shifting, like where opportunities were available, really changed pretty dramatically over the course of a few months during the spring and summer of last year. And that was something that each region really had to grapple with, of how they were going to adapt to the fact that industries like hospitality, as Karen mentioned, that had previously had hundreds or thousands of openings, suddenly were laying off hundreds and thousands of workers. A second piece I think that came through a lot was how the accessibility of training itself had really changed. So many providers, whether they be community colleges or workforce development organizations, having to move online for the first time or enforce social distancing regulations in their training spaces was a big factor that came across all of the different cities. A lot of changes around how you search for jobs in this strange environment, and which pieces of that as well were kind of moving online or being conducted in different forms. A number of the different workforce offices also talking about the changing nature of job search requirements from the government, which really affected some of the incentives that affected all different kinds of players in the system. And then I think, to Karen's point, this disproportionate impact both of the public health aspects of the pandemic, but then of course in terms of who lost jobs and who lost income during this period came through a lot. And so we spent a lot of time talking about whether it be wraparound services or a racial equity agenda. So many problems that were pre-existing prior to the pandemic, but really the Band-Aid ripped off and were exposed in a new way was a common theme across all of the regions that we worked with in the course of this process.
Thank you, Rachel. So can you talk a little bit, both of you, about what prevents someone from accessing workforce training?
Sure. So I think, as Rachel said, the problems that we had pre-pandemic just became exacerbated during the pandemic. So some of these same issues existed, but now they've really raised to the forefront. So issues of childcare, quality, consistent childcare has been a huge barrier for people to go back into the labor market. Transportation, especially when we saw during the pandemic, the height of the pandemic, many of the transportation systems had limited schedules or modified schedules, which made it more difficult for individuals to get to work. And then one of the most critical things I think that came out during the pandemic was the lack of broadband access. So I think that many people think that broadband is just available everywhere, but we know that that is not the case. And many individuals, their only internet connection may be their cell phone. And as a result, it's very difficult to connect to, as Rachel said, a lot of innovations were occurring around virtual delivery and online delivery. But if you didn't have the basic equipment to be able to access that, and with libraries and other public spaces closed during the pandemic, it really demonstrated the difficulty that people had to figure out how to engage in their job search, and then to try to address needs of ensuring the health and well-being and safety of their children while they're looking for work or going to work, and then understanding and seeing if you have reliable transportation to get to and from work. So I would just say those three things really came out in all the cities that we looked at.
Thank you so much.
I agree with those completely, and I'll just add two more. An additional factor that came through consistently, which again is not a new issue, but I think was exacerbated in this period, was just access to how do you finance the training. So whether it be for workers themselves who didn't know at a time when they were out of work where to get money to enroll in training programs, or for the government stakeholders and providers who were featured on our panels and talked about some of the struggles in terms of scaling successful programs that already worked. I think that this is often an overlooked piece of the puzzle. There are some streams out there, but at large, we haven't invested as a country in particularly making short-term training and reskilling broadly available to the masses of the U.S. population. And to the extent that funding streams exist, there was also a lot of discussion during these panels about how individuals in some of these cities may not be aware of the funding that they actually were eligible for, whether that be Pell Grants or WIOA or income-based income share agreements, et cetera. So that was another piece that I think can be overlooked here. And a second factor that I think often gets overlooked is just around understanding which training program to actually enroll in. So the difficulty of the navigation piece was a theme that came through across all of these different cities. So yes, there are a lot of options out there, and that can almost be overwhelming for someone who's lost a job, whether it be during the pandemic or in another instance, and how to make sense of all of the different types of options that might exist in your community to know which one is a good investment. All of that became even harder in a moment where the country was going through an economic and public health crisis, and it wasn't clear if jobs that have been growing in the past were going to continue to grow. That makes it really hard to make good decisions about retraining. And I think we saw some growing uncertainty or skepticism amongst some Americans about just not knowing what's a good choice to make at this moment.
Great, thank you. So I'm hearing a lot of these wraparound services for the individual being key to helping with getting retrained and reskilled. And that brings me to my next question for both of you regarding this retraining. Is it the responsibility of the individual to imagine themselves doing other jobs or wanting retraining? Or are these programs reaching out to folks that are unemployed? Unemployed. So is this a push or pull type thing, or is it both? And I'll start with you, Karen.
Sure. So I would say it's both, right? I do think there's been some, it looks like some has shifted more towards the individual, right? That the individual is responsible. And I think to Rachel's point, that issue of career navigation becomes that much more critical, which is how do I find those types of opportunities? But I think there are also some, and we heard some great examples of innovative employers, nonprofits, workforce intermediaries that are doing some great work trying to reach out to that community. So one example was in Birmingham, Alabama, PAC Health, which employed healthcare advisors for individuals with chronic healthcare conditions, traditionally recruited people who were in allied health fields, such as dietitians. But they had a huge demand for this, for health advisors. And so they started a program where they really were looking for people with non-healthcare backgrounds, that they would then provide a training program where the person could go through, become employed. And once they became employed in customer service, they could work their way up by going through a certification program to become a healthcare advisor. So this was paying livable wages. It was looking at a different population. They were expanding their workforce pool and really being creative in how they were growing their business while simultaneously providing opportunities to individuals who may never have thought about being a healthcare advisor or a customer service representative to a healthcare advisor. So while it seems that there are, a lot of negatives, there were also some really uplifting stories and positives that came out of these communities across the country. Wichita was another example where they were getting very creative with a partnership with the chamber and their workforce system because of not just COVID, but the fact of the 737 MAX issue with Boeing. So they had a lot of skilled workers who were working on the 737 MAX who were going to lose their jobs. And they wanted to keep those skilled workers in the community of Wichita, knowing that they needed to grow and expand additional businesses. So they brought together some unique partners with the chamber, the workforce system, employers to really think about how that could be done and to recognize kind of the double hit they were taking at the same time. It wasn't just COVID, but they also had an industry that was very hard hit during COVID, but was having some troubles prior to COVID as well. So I think there are some uplifting stories, but it's push and pull, maybe with a little more towards kind of shifting towards the individual, I would say.
Excellent. Great examples. Rachel, did you want to add anything?
I love Karen's examples. I agree on the push and pull. Some of the most compelling stories that I recall from the workshops were also just really focused in on the communal piece. Sometimes we overlook the importance of social capital in the job search and how people in your networks, of whether it be friends or colleagues or relatives, are really critical pieces of understanding when jobs become available and helping you get a foot in the door. And that creates all kinds of structural disadvantages, though, if you think about who has had access to jobs in the past and then how we open up more doors for more people. I'm recalling, though, an example from Richmond, the Office of Community Wealth Building, I thought had a really inspiring model where they were using what they called an ambassadors program. And they were recruiting community members who were actually acting as kind of these two-way conduits of information, where they were providing information both about what the community needed in that moment back to the office and to the government, but also sharing out information about like the services that were available, whether it be food programs, but also on sort of job search questions out to community members. And one of the things that they encountered, to these discussions around broadband access and internet, was a lot of the information that folks thought was really out there. It was on their websites. So many people weren't aware of if you didn't have a smartphone or you weren't tapped into those kind of networks. So they went old school and they were blanketing the community with paper notices about programs, putting them up on storefronts and homes, And that was really the way to kind of get the word out and help connect neighbors and family members and friends to services that could help them in this moment. So to me, that was a really inspiring model. I think, there's so much focus on the ways in which technology has accelerated and innovation has accelerated in this moment, but also we can't forget that some people may be left behind in that effort if we don't act with intentionality to bring them along for the ride.
I like that, Rachel. And innovation doesn't always have to be super techy, right? It can be a new mode or new medium of getting information to folks the best way possible. So I really appreciate that. So this is a very relevant question, especially as cities now are starting to get so much funding and federal funding and all types of funds. How will programs to train STEM workers actually capitalize on this infrastructure and COVID recovery bill? What are these cities doing and what can they do?
Well, I mean, I think there's a number of things. One is, you really have to look at, and I think the 5 workshops unearthed models that are working, right? What is actually putting people, one, into living wage jobs? So let's be really intentional about the types of training that we're going to use these Recovery Act funds for, so that people can have a sustainable wage. Also looking at what the demand is, right? Where is the employer demand? And I think all of the communities we looked at either used Burning Glass or MC to gather labor market data information, supplementing the publicly available information that's available through BLS. So, making decisions based on data, I think, is critical during this, looking at some of the models that we know work and seeing if those models can be replicated in that particular state, city, or region. And then, being able to continue to collect data. So I think that's another issue that, really came up. We see a lot of new providers coming into the marketplace, which is exciting. And we see new providers partnering with our traditional providers like community colleges and 4-year universities, but we still lack a lot of data on outcomes. And so the ability to gather that data through this program so that we can learn from it and learn, hopefully we don't have another pandemic, but I'm sure we'll have some type of other issue that we have to deal with in the future, that we do things differently and we make sure we're really helping the people that we need to help to get them back into the labor market and to help the businesses find the skilled workers that they need, particularly in these STEM areas.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with all of Karen's points. I guess maybe 2 things I'll add. The first was I'm appreciative in the recovery bills how much emphasis there is on this theme that came across in our conversations on the wraparound support piece. So how cities and states and regions really need an integrated strategy, and it doesn't make sense necessarily to invest in skills alone without thinking about all of the enabling factors that will allow someone to both start training, finish training, and then start a job and stay on the job. So to the extent that cities and states are thinking about how to use this funding, being able to bundle together and really take this approach that thinks about transportation and childcare at the same time that you're thinking about your training and workforce development initiatives, I think is really important and is something that's been prioritized in the legislation that's come out. So would encourage states and cities to really think about that as they, rather than spreading the money so thin that you maybe reach more people, but they're not going to be able to succeed and actually take advantage to get into that better job. What are the sets of maybe deeper supports that you need, but will really be transformative for someone going through that experience. A second area I think that I've been thinking a lot about as well on the ecosystem approaches is just ways that cities can pilot some of these questions on hybrid and remote options that have become more popular, often by necessity during the pandemic, but we've seen in some of our research, interviews with workers and learners who have really appreciated in some ways the added flexibility that has come to their lives, especially if you're caring for children at home. or have other caregiving responsibilities. And so it's not to say that we want fully online options, but being able to both embrace and then evaluate as time goes on which pieces of workforce development can be scaled through online models and which pieces really benefit from a human in-person approach, and not being afraid to support some of these more hybrid types of approaches. I think will be an interesting learning experience for the country in the coming years ahead.
Yeah, I would also add to that is, a focus on kind of the stackable credentials, right? And the relationship between different types of credentials, and that we're looking at that using this recovery. So, how do certifications fit into degrees, fit in with other certificates? How do they stack towards career pathways? Are we giving people credentials that actually allow them to continue a career pathway if they so choose, that it allows them to lead to increased responsibility, a job that pays a better wage? And then also kind of that combination of that integration of credentials, I think, is really critical. We talk a lot about competencies, but yet we know a lot of the education and training is not built on competencies yet. It's built on learning outcomes that haven't been broken down into competencies. So really being able to focus on that, and also to focus, I think it came out a lot at the workshops, is learn and earn opportunities, right? Recognizing that many people cannot go into training full time. They still need to earn a wage and support their family. And so how are we developing more and more programs that are combined learning and earning, which allows individuals to meet, all of the needs that they need to do in order to be successful?
One final thing that I'd add that Karen comments inspired for me is, there were so many innovative and exciting and proven programs that were highlighted through the workshop series. And I would also urge policymakers across the country to look in their own communities and take a first glance and say, which of these can be scaled to reach more people at this moment using these additional resources. So I'm recalling a panel in Boston, Jewish Vocational Services, led by Jerry Rubin, incredible English for Advancement program focused on English language learners and new immigrants in the community, has been studied under a randomized controlled trial, really impressive results. And if you think about the number of people that they serve right now versus the number that could be reached in the greater Boston area, they highlighted enormous potential for expansion. So are there ways in which these federal dollars right now can be used to invest in proven program models and allowing them to just reach more people than they had in prior years? And that may require some creative thinking around financing and braiding together different resources. But I would encourage kind of policymakers to look at home in their own communities right now and see what are the programs that we have that could really benefit from this additional resources to be able to reach more people than we have in the past.
Excellent, thank you. And both of your responses sparked another question, so I'm going to deviate a little bit. But there's so many partners in this space with these nonprofits and these groups that do the training. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship and the importance of community colleges in these cities? And what is that relationship like when it comes to this retraining and these, again, stackable credentials that you mentioned, Karen?
Yeah, so I think community colleges play a critical role, and that was highlighted in all 5 of the workshops in terms of, I think they were partners with just about everyone. Now, on the flip side, one of the challenges during the pandemic has been that the enrollment in community colleges has decreased. And I think that goes back to Rachel's comment, where the people who need the training the most may not have the resources by which to provide it. So we're really going to need to think about some innovative strategies there around financing, and whether all financing has a cost, whether all training has a cost, or whether there's some training that is subsidized to allow individuals to kind of get on their career pathway. But I think community colleges, I think, are fantastic resources, but in the best examples we saw, none of them are doing it alone, right? They are partnering with other organizations in the community. So whether that's the Chamber of Commerce, which has the talent pipeline management system that works with a lot of community colleges and four-year institutions around the country, whether that is workforce intermediaries, community-based partnerships and community-based organizations and other nonprofits, and employers. Let's not forget the business community, which really knows the demand that they're facing and the skills that they require. And so the community colleges that have done the best job really have formed relationships and partnerships with those critical organizations, as well as governmental organizations. So the workforce boards in their local community, and they've created, programs and partnerships that help move people through career pathways. And I think that collaboration is critical. No one entity is going to be successful on its own. And the more that we can get people to work together towards similar goals, supporting programs we know that work and help scale, as Rachel said, those programs where might be having great results, but could reach a lot more people if additional funding or other collaborators were brought to the table, that would be the way to go.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have a ton to add here. I think community colleges are going to be really critical partners in their recovery. And we saw some great examples throughout the workshop series of innovative and responsive community colleges doing what they could in the moment to shift, to meet people where they were at, to find ways to continue to support their students in spite of all of the challenges that they were facing in their lives. So I honestly felt like quite inspired by that piece of the commitment of the community college leadership to really be there for their students and their families at what is such a hard time for so many in this country. I do think, there's been an increased recognition of the role that the community colleges play, whether it be in serving many of our essential workers, of serving many of the people that were hit hardest by this crisis. Community colleges disproportionately, their student body disproportionately are students of color and coming from low-wage families relative to four-year counterparts. And so these are students who really felt the impact of the pandemic more starkly in a lot of ways than peers particularly in private colleges, but also in public four-years as well. I'm recalling Northern Essex Community College talking about the ways in which they set up Wi-Fi hotspots in their parking lots to help people at that moment. Many colleges scaling up their food pantries and even doing food delivery to try to help people at home who had lost income. So lots of really inspiring stories from the community college system. That said, obviously, as Karen mentioned on the enrollment question, this has been a really challenging moment for community colleges nationally. And I think one thing that's come through over the last year is how many students are enrolling in community colleges, not just to go to college, but because they view college as the pathway to economic mobility in this country and to a good job. And so it is incumbent on community college leaders in partnership with businesses and government and other stakeholders in their communities to be able to deliver on that. And so I do think we're coming out of this period in the community college sector with a renewed focus on what does community college look like as a pathway into good jobs? What are the ways in which we can make that pathway smoother for more people so that it truly does allow more people of all ages in this country to get access to family sustaining wages and good career pathways, opportunities for their futures.
Thank you. Well, I have one last question for you both as we wrap up today. As the country is so-called reopening, which is the term that everyone's using, how can we make sure that we don't make the same mistakes or the mistakes that we made pre-pandemic when it comes to training and workforce development? What are some things we can do so that we can set ourselves up better for the future?
Yeah, I think one is that we can, make a commitment to gather more data, right, about the outcomes for different training programs. There are a lot of innovative opportunities out there, and I think we want that innovation to continue. And we also want it to be where you can make mistakes, right, as you're innovating and to keep trying and get better. But we also want to know what the outcomes are for workers. And I think if we have that kind of cyclical and systematic data collection, we can use that data to make continuous improvements. So we're not setting people up for failure. I think we also need to really think about financing and how we finance training programs, especially for individuals who don't have the resources, but definitely need to be connected back into the labor market. You know, how can financing be used for short-term credentials? We know that a lot of the community colleges are developing more and more modular, stackable, you know, kind of get information in bite-sized amounts as you need it. But how can you use Pell Grants and other funding opportunities to pay for that if it doesn't immediately lead to, you know, a degree? And so we need to kind of expand our horizons, I think, a little bit and become creative. The pandemic forced a lot of people to be creative and move to things like online and virtual delivery much faster than they would have otherwise. And now that that's been tried, I think we have a great opportunity to build upon that, to really be able to make these opportunities more broadly available to individuals.
I agree with all that. And I guess what I'd add, one theme I really heard came through across all the workshops, and I think it was particular to this moment of really being in such a challenging crisis for the country, is that it allowed people to see in a lot of ways that it can't just be skills alone in workforce development. Like, it has to be skills and jobs and good jobs at the other end. And if you invest in skills without having a connection point to that good job, that's not enough, and that's not gonna solve the problems that we're facing in this country. And so I think that's become really clear and really did shine through in the words of all of our speakers. There was a lot of discussion across the workshops as well as around the kind of intersection of this COVID period and the summer of George Floyd, and how do we think about the connection of these questions to racial equity. And unfortunately, in terms of not repeating the mistakes of the past, too often workforce development has led people into dead-end jobs, and that's been skewed across races. And so how do we much more intentionally not just think about job placement and say, well, someone got into a job and that's success, but did they get into a good job and get into a job that will allow them to continue to make more money over the course of their career? And I think that's going to require a lot of intentionality of thinking about who programs serve and where we're sending them, and what opportunity really looks like for all members of our society. So to me, that was an inspiring part of the conversations of participating in this committee and hearing what was going on across these very diverse cities across the country, because all of the leaders, I think, really seemed focused on this in a renewed way and committed to bringing together the stakeholders across business, across education, across policy that would be required to make that change real for more people.
Thank you. Well, that was great. And we ended on this great positive note. So I want to thank you two for taking the time again today to speak with us. And I wanted to remind everyone that you can find these strategies in the full report. It's going to be available online again at nap.edu. So thank you to all my Horizon attendees.